Donc, bonjour tout le monde. Thank you for being here. C'est un honneur pour Dominique, Herman, Dominique et moi-même de vous présenter, Ben et moi-même de vous présenter, Dom and the Dude, ça, de vous présenter le fruit du travail des derniers mois en collaboration avec la Ville de Montréal qui est avec nous aujourd'hui. Donc, our policy challenge, as Chris mentioned, is to highlight best practices in the large-scale deployment of 5G for the City of Montreal, so how we can increase the municipal leadership in this policy area. We focus mainly on the adaptation of 5G-enabled services and making sure that this transition is socially inclusive. I'm sure that it will greatly interest some members of our jury. So to give you a brief overview of our methodology, we have 9 recommendations that were designed following 25 stakeholder consultations, and we referenced over 100 sources. So to tell you more about 5G, I'll pass it over to Dom.
Thank you, Fred. So 5G is a modern evolution of mobile wireless communications that uses different levels of frequency to transmit information, ranging from lower band, similar to what we all know as LTE, to higher band spectrum. The particular innovation of 5G is that it represents an advancement in bandwidth, making use of high-frequency millimeter waves of above 24 gigahertz, allowing for improvements in data capacity and user speed. 5G is being adopted rapidly in jurisdictions around the world for use by both individual consumers and large commercial interests, with many identifying the large-scale economic potential of this evolution in communications. This potential comes from 5G allowing for enhanced mobile broadband and power efficiency, but it comes at the cost of millimeter waves having a greatly limited range. This creates the need for denser antenna deployment, bringing new challenges to urban settings as they have to be deployed on city architecture and property. Because telecommunications regulations lies within federal jurisdiction, the City of Montreal does not actually possess any direct legal authority to dictate the terms of infrastructure or spectrum deployment. Today, cities in Canada rely on municipal access agreements, otherwise known as MAAs, to exercise authority and negotiate with telcos different aspects of technology deployment. MAAs are legal instruments by which municipalities give access to rights of way to parties interested in the installation of equipment on city-owned facilities. Because of the important relationship between telcos and municipalities, the CRTC has developed a model MAA in direct response to disputes between the two parties. The level of influence of a city on the 5G debate will be determined by its successful use of rights-of-way agreements, the strength of public acceptance of 5G, its ownership of crucial assets such as physical infrastructure, and access permits.
So now that we have a bit of a better idea of what 5G is, we can begin to understand the opportunities of this transition. 5G doesn't only represent higher speeds and greater bandwidth and lower latency, it's a profoundly different perspective on how we bridge the physical and the digital worlds. As one of our international interview participants put it, 5G gives us the ability to improve and connect these two worlds like never before. In a world of complex policy challenges, where efficiency and effectiveness are always at a premium, there is incredible economic and social value in such a remarkable tool. For one, 5G allows governments to provide better services at a more cost-effective rate. With improvements in the quality and quantity of data, public office holders have a better informed vision of who their citizens are and what services they need. One of 5G's greatest strengths is the increased capacity for coordination and communication. This could bring better traffic management, telehealth, and other services that make up any vibrant modern city. It also represents an opportunity for growth in the private sector, as industries such as entertainment, manufacturing, and transportation could benefit from these new capabilities. In the Canadian context, the Information and Communications Technology Council has estimated 5G could represent $14 billion of growth to the Canadian economy and indicate the growth of 46,000 potential new jobs. But the best results are going to require strong municipal leadership. The majority of 5G development up to this point has been led at the national level, but that doesn't exclude the cities. Cities are a perfect environment to test and pilot these types of strategies and maximize the benefit of 5G technology. And because small cells are going to depend on metropolitan infrastructure and dense antenna setup, it's not just advisable that the city have a say in this deployment, it's a must, because they're going to be the ones to take on all the risk and all the rewards. But how do we make this work for everyone? So I've highlighted the importance of the city identifying what their goals are for this transition, but there's much more to it than that. So to ensure a fair and equitable deployment of 5G for the benefit of all, policymakers are going to need to take a mindful yet systematic approach. The all-important first step will be engaging with stakeholders and experts as part of deployment. Based on our research and extensive consultation, third parties are essential in recruiting specialized knowledge from the tech field to identify, develop, and test new services while sharing the costs. Public-private partnerships have been known to successfully combine public funds with expert design and have a proven track record of enabling 5G technologies. Another important element will, simply put, be trust. We need to build trust not only in those who are deploying the services, but in the technology itself. When I talk about digital trust, it refers to the expectation that new services are going to, of course, protect stakeholder interests and meet their mandates while upholding social values that we as residents of a city expect. Without that, the positive effects of this evolution is going to be greatly muted. Strong public trust can also be grown through principled implementation, and one that values transparency, public engagement, and risk management. In examples all over the world, a gradual implementation that balances innovation with the ethical principles of technological humanism has been shown to be the most effective way to realize the benefits of new and innovative services. In addition, governments are going to need to recognize the potential of analytical data to inform astute policymaking. Because the path to a data-driven public sector involves creating an environment for the access and sharing of information, yes, but also the cross-government use of this information if we're meant to incentivize economic and social development. And now, to Fred with the current policy context.
Thank you, Ben. So, on the current policy environment, the city is already exploring the full potential of 5G, as there is currently a pilot project in downtown Montreal in partnership with carriers and universities. While the results of this pilot are still unknown to this day, we know that the city formed a Health and Social Acceptability Advisory Committee that might provide some answers and some paths to reduce the sensitivity around this issue. Don mentioned earlier the benefits of millimeter wave, but the CRTC has yet to approve the large-scale deployment of this technology and to launch the auction for the spectrum. The current 5G bands that are deployed in Montreal today are closer in speed and the latency of LTE, what some people call LTE+. So we're still a few years away from the full benefits of 5G. One key difference of 5G compared to the previous generations is the need for higher antenna density. Telcos have a greater need for access to public infrastructure, such as street light poles or bus shelters, providing an opportunity for greatly improving the collaboration between telcos and municipal governments. Multiple stakeholders also mentioned the need to rebuild the open data infrastructure of the City of Montreal in order to support the higher volume of real-time data. With the Internet of Things, there's an opportunity to deploy extra sensors and inputs to greatly improve the service reliability of the City of Montreal, both for citizens and policymakers. But one of the biggest challenges that remains for the City of Montreal to this day is the asymmetrical information between partners. The city still relies a lot on the expertise of telcos and lacks access to a comprehensive and independent data to better inform and support its policy decisions. So we already identified different areas of improvement, so I'll pass it over to Herman to introduce our recommendation framework.
Thank you, Fred. So as my colleagues have said, cities will be at the forefront of 5G deployment, and their communities will be the first to experience the risks and rewards. It is therefore critical to empower municipal administrations as they need to play an active role in this deployment process. Our team strongly believes that local impacts need local solutions, and over the past 8 months, we worked with a single objective in mind, ensuring that the City of Montreal has enough capacity, information, and the right policy mechanisms to maximize the social value and mitigate the challenges attached to 5G deployment. Our 4 recommendations focus on 4 critical areas of intervention in the telecommunications sphere: infrastructure deployment, social acceptability, the adaptation of services, and the digital divide. First, it is crucial to enhance the city's monitoring capacity, as reliable and independent information is crucial to manage, oversee, and align 5G infrastructure deployment with the municipality's interest, but also to enhance evidence-based decision-making. Second, we believe that social acceptability must be at the heart of a successful 5G deployment. And we must ensure that there's not only consent, but ongoing consultation with Montreal residents, as this is the key to a future-proof 5G implementation. The benefits of 5G can only be realized if the communities identify them as such. So the city must lead a proactive communication, not only showcasing the benefits of the technology, but also telling us about the latest science around it. We recognize the potential that this technology has to transform administrative processes, but also city services. Think about intelligent traffic management or energy efficiency. And the city must act as an early adopter of these technologies, not only trying to understand how it can put them into their own functions, but also facilitating internet service providers and developers all the infrastructure and data they need to develop and test their own services. But we must ensure that this is an inclusive process and that nobody gets left behind. So there's significant uncertainty regarding the impact of 5G on the urban digital divide. And this tangible problem must not wait to 5G to be solved. So cities can start understanding how to leverage on 5G technologies to bridge all aspects of the digital divide: coverage, affordability, and accessibility. We know that our recommendations entail complexities and also resource constraints. So we will focus on describing them, and we will leave you at the end of our presentation with a framework that enhances their coherence and feasibility. So I'll jump to our first recommendation. The first recommendation is the creation of a dedicated 5G urban observatory for the City of Montreal that serves as a research and monitoring hub that constantly evaluates the performance, impacts, and benefits of the technology. This action will help us address the lack of monitoring and in-house expertise that just Fred mentioned a moment ago. And through 5G observatories, cities like Barcelona and Nantes have been able to successfully track progress on indicators of public interest regarding digital inclusion, health effects, etc., but also to identify setbacks on time, ensuring that they have an inclusive, safe, and sustainable 5G implementation. While international best practices provide us with some relevant guidance, it is crucial to also generate some on-the-ground knowledge to be able to develop tailored interventions for the City of Montreal. Another advantage of the observatory is that it'll allow us to guarantee the continued articulation between stakeholders that are crucial for the processes of planning, resource allocation, and all decisions about 5G in the city. And through this platform, the city can also mobilize resources and knowledge from the academia, the private sector, and also the government agencies in research projects and testing projects also in areas of municipal interest. And it'll also show the city's commitment to transparency and citizens' concerns because it'll involve them in all steps of the way. The legitimacy of this structure will be determined by the consensus that exists around its objectives, scope, composition, and methods. So it is important to embrace a participatory approach in its deployment. I'll pass it over to Dominique for our next recommendation.
With an observatory allowing for enhanced understanding of 5G implications and implementation strategies, the City of Montreal can explore different options for small cell deployment. This would permit the creation of a comprehensive package deal that includes locations such as bus stops, city-owned buildings, metro signs, lampposts, and more, so that the city can leverage itself as the best option to telcos. For a second recommendation, we suggest that the City of Montreal showcases itself as a one-stop shop to telcos as it would offer everything they need. Because telecommunications companies need access to public infrastructure, a streamlined permitting process in exchange for voluntary compliance to certain local concerns can greatly leverage the city as an essential partner. The city can effectively address community concerns and preserve the aesthetic appeal of its neighborhoods by ensuring that small cells adhere to specific criteria, namely seamless integration with its surrounding environment, their utility, and artistic design. Telcos would be willing to financially contribute, as signing a single agreement with a local government can greatly simplify the deployment process. Ben will explain the third recommendation.
Thank you very much. So the last couple recommendations are going to give the city some tools to actually influence the 5G deployment process, but they're still going to need to maintain public support and social acceptability every step of the way. Among our stakeholder interviews, one of the most common observations was that 5G cannot be successful if residents of the city reject the premise fundamentally. With concerns that surround data governance and public health, Montreal's deployment is going to need to address those questions without inflaming the debate. That's exactly why we're recommending that the city foster social acceptability, first by conducting public consultations, and then by executing a strategic communications campaign. This two-step measure should be designed to address citizens' concerns and provide evidence-based answers to the issues that matter most to Montrealers. As we all know, Montreal possesses an unmistakable culture and community, and it's something that the residents of the city care deeply about. So if you want to embark on a meaningful deployment of 5G, you need to understand what it is exactly people want from the technology. What services are they looking forward to? Which ones would they rather go without? What are their long-term concerns for public health, data, and infrastructure? You don't know if you don't ask, but local partners such as the Office de Consultation Publique de Montréal, the CRTC, or the Chamber of Commerce can be essential partners in finding some of those answers. And with this valuable input, the city can design a communications campaign around the key areas of concern that they've identified through their consultations. With every iteration, the city needs to show themselves as the go-to source for proactive and transparent information concerning 5G's arrival in Montreal. It's not only going to foster public trust that's so important to the process, but it's going to alert people to the services that hopefully will be there to improve their quality of life. And Herman to take us through the next recommendation.
Thank you, Ben. So with our previous recommendations, we have ensured that the city has a stance and a say in the process of infrastructure deployment and that there's enough social trust in the technology. We have created a window of opportunity to facilitate the development of 5G services in the city. We know that the widespread deployment of 5G entails context-specific and unknown challenges for municipalities. This is the reason why more than 118 cities across the globe have approached this issue with an experimental and gradual approach. So we recommend the city the creation of a public-private framework that allows the infrastructure and resources to test pilots in controlled environments in multiple places of the city and many use cases. As the observatory will focus on gathering essential data and inputs during the deployment process, this public-private framework will allow us to conduct multiple pilots and trials, enabling us to understand progressively the risks and benefits of the technology. As our stakeholder said, it's not what you deploy, but also how you do it. So a gradual implementation will further enhance social acceptability while showcasing in real time the benefits of the technology. Testing 5G in controlled environments also lowers the political, financial, and social risks for the municipality, but also for private actors, while providing important feedback in municipal policymaking. So the city can identify potential issues and formulate mitigation strategies before a mass-scale deployment of 5G. So in summary, this recommendation will allow us to unlock the full potential of 5G while we ensure its safe integration into our city's environment. Private actors have supported this approach in many other cities of the world, and they've done so because they understand that deploying this technology without a consolidated market will result in underutilized infrastructure and expensive investments. And they use these frameworks pretty frequently to mobilize stakeholders, create an ecosystem of users, and drive up demand for their services. However, the effectiveness of these pilot projects will be greatly undermined by the current status of the public data infrastructure of the city. Municipalities in the digital era must transcend from the mere duty of information publication, and they also must provide citizens and developers with information that is workable and that can be used for value generation purposes. So our fifth recommendation is the remodeling of the Montreal's open data sharing platform, Données Ouvertes, as it will foster public and private innovation. As of today, the platform presents some opportunities of improvement to better uphold the principles of exhaustiveness, ease of access, and accessibility that are on the Montreal's Open Data Charter. 5G will enable the city to gather more information with efficiency and accuracy, which not only will it serve to give citizens insights about the city, but also it'll work for the city itself. The process will not only benefit creating and accessing services, but also this improved platform will create something that is called cross-departmental collaboration in policymaking. We will be able to tackle complex challenges in a holistic approach. Think about transportation, public safety, or urban planning. Startups nowadays and developers need access to this information that is produced at the municipal level to develop their own products and services. So 5G will enable cities to develop real-time data sets and APIs that will be greatly of interest for these developers. However, the city must ensure that there's a responsible use of the data that it produces. Private actors must uphold all the principles that are compiled in Montreal's digital charter, but also must the city must ensure that all these data exchanges are grounded not only on dynamics, but also on ethical grounds. So I'll leave it over to Fred for our next recommendation.
Thank you, Herman. So far, our policy proposals greatly facilitate the involvement of the city in the development of infrastructure and services adaptation. But if we want to build the social trust that Ben touched on, we also need to make sure that this transition is inclusive and that it will not widen even more the persisting digital gap. The following 4 recommendations aim to foster digital inclusion in a way that everybody can take advantage of the full benefits of 5G. The first step to achieve this outcome is to collect more comprehensive data on the digital divide and how it plays out in different parts of the city. The current lack of public information greatly hinders the efficiency of policy decisions. In a context of limited financial resources, the City of Montreal should make sure that its policy decisions benefits the people most in need. This recommendation can easily be implemented by partnering with either a university or a nonprofit. This is what the City of Toronto did a few years ago when it assessed different aspects in a survey, such as home internet access, internet-enabled devices, affordability, speed, quality, or usage. The report concluded of disproportionate effects on elderly people, lower-income households, and marginalized communities, as well as some paths to attenuate this gap. Conducting a survey is cheap, yet it brings a lot of value for policymakers. This recommendation is for us the first step to better inform the design of the 3 following recommendations, the first being on your right, the creation of a digital canopy program in Montreal. So this recommendation consists of upgrading and expanding the public hotspot network across the City of Montreal in order to achieve enhanced connectivity and coverage in public spaces, especially in lower-income boroughs such as Montréal Nord. The city already deployed over 800 Wi-Fi hotspots in the past few years. However, multiple stakeholders pointed out the lack of speed and reliability of this network. Montreal Wi-Fi was also initially intended for touristic and business applications and not as a tool to bridge the digital divide. But as 5G supports a higher bandwidth, it allows greater speed, security, and reliability that can greatly improve the user's experience on these public networks. Fixed wireless access brings down connectivity costs and facilitates the deployment of 5G-powered hotspots in public parks, facilities, public transit, or even apartment buildings. This is again something that the City of Toronto implemented during the COVID-19 pandemic, when they partnered with Cisco to deploy free hotspots for vulnerable populations. The City of Montreal can also partner with telcos to deploy 5G hotspots or connected hubs for specific areas or specific usage. As this recommendation would build on existing initiatives such as Montreal Wi-Fi and seek new partnership opportunities, we believe that the implementation could be greatly facilitated. There's a potential here to connect everybody everywhere in the city. And I'll pass it over to them for the next recommendation.
Thank you. With the development of the digital canopy program that Fred just explained, the city can design a more comprehensive lending program than what it is already available, in order to facilitate access to mobile devices. Connectivity lending programs provide access to the internet to people who would otherwise be left without it. Its lack of access to these devices is a contributing factor to the digital divide. The city has already developed a lending program through its public libraries, but it is restricted to on-site lending of tablets and laptops, limiting the potential to enhance connectivity in lower-income neighborhoods. Connectivity lending programs allow marginalized communities to have access to the internet and therefore city services. Experiences from other jurisdictions across Canada and the United States show that lending programs are an effective tool to bridge the digital divide. As an example, the Las Vegas Clark County Library District has an award-winning mobile device lending program developed as a community initiative. It provides temporary access to smartphones and tablets to individuals in need. It allows low-income residents and people experiencing homelessness to borrow mobile devices for a period of 18 months. These are equipped with essential apps and internet connectivity through 5G. This enhances digital inclusion, and bridges the digital divide. By granting access to devices, individuals can engage in online education, job searches, and other essential digital activities, empowering them with the necessary tools to thrive in an increasingly connected world. Pass it over to Ben for our last recommendation.
So, in the last few recommendations, we proposed some measures that are going to target the digital divide. But whether it's through coverage or research or device access, all important aspects, you still need the relevant skills to interact with the online world. And for some of us, those barriers to access are things that many of us take for granted, like using a internet browser or registering for services. Out of pure curiosity, has anyone here had to teach your parents how to use social media? So you take my point. Because these skills are best learned in person, practically, and through trial and error. So this is a perfect opportunity for the city to step in and bridge the digital divide. We recommend that through Montreal Public Libraries, the city expands its digital literacy workshops to target larger social participation. Montreal Libraries already offer workshops of this kind, but we've observed that they target more the technical side of skills, using a computer or using a device. These are very important, especially with our past recommendations, but what we're proposing is that they elaborate on these programs to teach courses on social media or data literacy, coding, project management, because this initiative would also equip residents with the skills they need to thrive in the modern job market and contribute to the digital economy. Today, online communications have become the dominant vehicle of social participation, and we can't risk widening the gap in digital literacy as part of our deployment. Libraries are perfectly positioned to deliver this service because they're already in the community and they're already ingrained meeting parts for people all across the city. For those unable or unwilling to travel, for example, city staff can also be trained to go out into the community as digital intermediaries and assist people in their own homes to make sure that they're hooked up or by appointment. Free of charge, this training is going to contribute to social inclusion and well-being by reducing isolation and providing essential services to the most vulnerable populations. And to take us through some implementation, I'll turn it back to Fred.
Thank you, sir. So, of course, implementing all of those recommendations at once can be very resource-intensive for the city. And while we believe those practices all contribute to the strengthening of municipal leadership in this policy area, the following implementation plan aims to provide a more realistic roadmap over the next 7 years. You probably cannot read anything, but we have a roadmap. So in the first 2 years, the focus would be on gaining a deeper comprehension of the current policy landscape. The city would assess current existing infrastructure development practices across Canada, engage in early discussions over the creation of an observatory with stakeholders, launch a public consultation campaign to collect citizens' concerns, and collect more comprehensive data on the digital divide to better understand how it plays out in different parts of the country. The midterm goals would be to implement those insights and findings from the newly acquired expertise. The city could benefit from the independent reports of the newly created observatory, launch an information campaign to address the concerns identified in the public consultation, and implement policy initiatives to bridge the digital divide and foster digital inclusion. Our hope at the long term is to provide a space for services innovation with strong collaboration with startups and telcos. We also hope that these recommendations will enhance social trust and provide an inclusive transition, and that the city will be able to conduct policy evaluation ahead of the next generation. 6G is expected to be publicly available starting in 2030, so this roadmap would expand the city's expertise just in time for an even stronger role in the future. Of course, this roadmap that you can see is heavily dependent on the city's political commitment, financial and human resources, and coordination with different stakeholders. And I'll pass it over to them for the conclusion.
Thank you. The potential of 5G technology is vast and transformative. It promises a new era of connectivity and innovation. With significantly faster speeds and lower latency, it has the power to revolutionize industries that are of interest to a city and its citizens, such as healthcare, transportation, entertainment, and manufacturing. The 5G revolution is inevitable. It will arrive in Montreal regardless of the city and its administration's preferences. This presentation has highlighted many best practices and innovative ways to overcome jurisdictional and technical challenges. Through our recommendations, we believe that the city can strengthen its role in all things 5G related. It is in the best interest of the City of Montreal to use all available opportunities to manage and oversee the deployment process, as getting involved can allow to better reap 5G benefits and have a stronger role in the future. Merci beaucoup. We look forward to your questions.
Okay, who is juror number one?
That's quick.
So thank you. That was a great presentation and the benefits of 5G as well. My question is more around the social acceptance piece. It seems to be a piece that was weaved throughout your presentation. I think your kind of recommendation is a large public consultation, some public communication to kind of address that. But I'm wondering if you minimize the concerns that people might have. And I say this because I had a client in Toronto. Google was a client. They were going to build a large part of the city of Toronto. And we did a large public consultation. We got all the feedback. We were ready to move forward with the project, but a very small but vocal minority of people made a lot of noise, and the city backed out of the project and didn't move forward. So I'm just wondering, how do you kind of counter those folks who, no matter what you put forth, no matter what the consultations say, they're just never going to agree with this project? Do you just kind of railroad over them and move forward with it, or what does that look like to kind of get over that hump of people who will never accept this as a project?
Thank you for the question. And yes, we're familiar with Sidewalk Labs, and Dominic may want to elaborate a little bit on this in a second, but it's why we underscore the importance of the principled implementation, that around the world, models like La Ville de Nantes and the city of Barcelona have had successful implementation because they've taken their principles of transparency and proactive information disclosure so seriously. And not gone with things that people don't actually want. There's lots of great things that 5G can do, but it's not for every city. And so moving forward unilaterally, not to minimize some of the concerns, because in terms of public health, everyone's subject to Section 6 regulations under Health Canada, but the long-term effects of some radio frequencies aren't known, as well as data governance. That's something that we're always very concerned about. You can't push it aside, but if you're going to succeed in serving the quality of life of your citizens, which should be the goal of every municipality, you'll need to take that principled implementation. So I don't know if any of my teammates want to jump on that.
Okay. Sure. So thank you for your question. We really addressed the Sidewalk Labs in our report, mainly to explain how the city must have a proactive communication strategy. We know that some of the things that we heard from some of our stakeholders was that back at the time, there was little involvement from the city, and that most of the communications were coming from the private sector. This is not what we wanted. At the time, it played out really bad for the city of Toronto. Some concerns about not only misinformation, some fake news actually, about the creation of a social credit score system within Sidewalk Labs. And this whole thing emerged because of a poor role from the administration to communicate. So this is why we use it in our report as one of the cases to advocate for that proactive communication in the part of the city.
Shaq, weren't we brilliant to go ahead of the guy who actually knows something about this on this panel?
Warming us up.
The expert is just waiting here. You talked a lot about social acceptance for sure, but you also talked about the City of Montreal kind of leading by example and communicating to its citizens some of the things that the city could adopt using 5G that would provide better municipal services. And could you just talk a little bit about the extent to which you see that happening? Do you in your head have kind of a roadmap of what the low-hanging fruit might be? You've mentioned several times, traffic management or something like that. But I mean, do you have a sense of what the city could do in that 7-year period that would enhance their services?
Sure. Because, we had a number of brainstorming sessions when we were forming our recommendations, and one of the more interesting questions we asked ourselves were, I've lived in Montreal before. Most of us in the program are new to Montreal, and we go, what could this city really benefit from? And your mind immediately goes to traffic and maybe the potholes, but I don't know if 5G can do anything about that. But those types of tangible ideas. We heard from stakeholder we talked to overseas as part of a 5G corridor who talked about the port of Hamburg, that they focused on one thing. They just had sensors in their garbage cans, and it made it easier to pick up more routinely. It made the city cleaner. It was just one simple, winnable game that bought in some trust and acceptance of services that they've then been able to elaborate on. What that is for Montreal, I'm sure the fine folks at City Hall will be able to figure that out, but identifying what's a real need and what's simple to do is a great first step.
Yeah, if I may just add on that. We also talked to our sponsor. In our brief, we tried to because 5G, a lot of the talk around it is smart cities. And we kind of tried to stay away from that because it also can come with a lot of backlash and negative, smart cities require a lot of data and there's a lot of talk around that. But there are some features, for example, what Ben just explained. We talked to other international cities that have deployed 5G in a very, very large scale, doing pilot projects and testing services out in small scale to see how they work and then implementing them in a larger scale. So that's something the city can do, right? Grab 5G and see what best services they can implement. Do it in a small scale. Do it in downtown. There's pilot projects already going on, and then kind of allow them to explode for the benefit of the citizens.
Thanks. That was a great presentation. You worried?
Not at all.
You look a little tense. One, I'm going to just say editorial comment at the beginning. Great presentation, and you covered a wide range of issues and some very important social issues. I'm going to focus in a second more on the legal jurisdictional issue because it really is at the nub. But I do want to take a moment to point out that Montreal has been, of municipalities, an incredibly progressive and constructive player in these areas. Some cities don't have those characteristics. I'm not going to name any names, but Montreal is a leading example of a progressive city in terms of some of these issues. So I give them full public credit for that. I'm going to give you a little bit of a hard time. There's two statements you made, one of which I disagree with fundamentally, and one of which I think is absolutely right and critical. First one was, you said at the beginning, cities take on all the risks and rewards. I have to take issue with that. If you look at the expenditure and capital expense that the carriers must bear, and responsibility, including all the regulatory obligations, cost of spectrum, and so on, it is very, very large. And for their part, cities have both benefits and costs. Yes, they have the costs and difficulties associated with public attachments, predominantly powering them, and you've addressed those issues. But to say that the cities somehow bear a greater burden than the carriers deploying the service, I think I couldn't agree with. But the second statement you made was that cooperation between telcos and municipalities was critical, and that 110% agreement. And I think I just want you to talk a little bit, if I can focus my meandering comment here, on that balance. Yes, you mentioned municipal access agreements are critical. And you mentioned a whole bunch of things about the city can help guide the deployment and how it should. How do you see that balance between the responsibilities or burdens of the carriers who are deploying it, competing with one another, and bearing a larger financial burden, if you will, with the city's responsibilities to its citizens and its burden and opportunity? So I haven't heard a lot about the role of the carriers, and I'd just like you to bring out a little more how you see the respective balance between those critical players.
Well, first on your point about bearing costs, it's sure that on the financial cost, there's an obvious cost that is assumed by the telcos. I think in our case we were talking more about the social cost because the citizens are the ones like on the ground that will complain to their local carriers. And when we did multiple stakeholder consultations, multiple stakeholders mentioned that the city will have the social backlash of this implementation because when a citizen is angry, the citizen will not go speak to TELUS or Rogers. They will go to its city hall or its borough council and complain about that. So on the financial cost, I agree with you. But even there, I think in the research we did, we look over like the evolution of municipal access agreements. And something that I'm sure that you're familiar is that the cities across Canada had a hard time in the past years to justify through these MAAs some indirect costs. And I think they are, in the 2001 decision, there was the LETCOR principles that established that deploying infrastructure should be cost neutral for the city. So because it's deployed by telcos and by private companies, the citizens and the taxpayers should not have to bear this burden. And which is true, the MAs have been a good tool, I think, to be sure that those direct costs are not assumed by the city. But for specific indirect costs, I know that there've been a few lawsuits and a few legal challenges between telcos and cities on that regard. So maybe that's it for me. I don't know if anyone wants
Okay, thank you. Our next few minutes are for the sponsors and the coach. So David Fatteux from Ville de Montréal and John Stewart, coach.
Bonjour, merci beaucoup pour la présentation. On a eu plusieurs discussions sur le sujet, donc pas beaucoup de choses nouvelles aujourd'hui, et je dis pas ça négativement, mais en termes de je connais bien le dossier, je connais un peu votre point de vue, donc c'est sûr, j'ai beaucoup de questions, mais j'aime bien ce qui a été présenté aujourd'hui. Ça amène des questions, des réflexions que je vais rapporter avec moi qui vont être actives pendant encore un certain temps. Donc, merci beaucoup pour votre contribution là-dedans. Donc, plusieurs questions, je vais essayer de me limiter tout de même par rapport à ça. Une question au niveau de l'Observatoire 5G. Faire du chemin un petit peu sur la dernière question qui a été posée. On veut prendre un rôle de leadership là-dedans. D'un autre côté, les telcos déploient et ont leur schedule déjà planifié. Comment on les amène et comment est-ce qu'on les intéresse à mettre un peu un frein sur un déploiement et des activités uniquement liées à leurs intérêts pour les amener à prendre en considération des intérêts autres que leurs objectifs un peu plus corporate. Comment nous, on les amène alors qu'on n'a pas... Puis oui, il y a les MAAs, mais au-delà de tout ça, si on veut les amener dans un observatoire, si on veut les amener à prendre en compte d'autres éléments que comment ils font leurs activités depuis un bon nombre d'années, comment est-ce qu'on les amène dans cette direction-là dans un observatoire?
C'est une excellente question. En termes de création de l'observatoire, je pense que ce qu'on a mentionné, puis ce qui est ressorti beaucoup dans les consultations avec les différents acteurs, c'est que la 5G est différente des générations précédentes parce qu'on a besoin d'accéder aux infrastructures publiques, on a besoin d'accéder aux poteaux de téléphone, aux lumières de rue pour installer ces antennes. C'est quelque chose que les compagnies privées ont besoin davantage que dans sous les anciennes générations de technologies, de télécommunications. Donc, il y a certainement un intérêt du côté des compagnies de télécommunications de travailler un peu plus avec la ville. Puis je sais que la ville, vous travaillez déjà en collaboration avec les compagnies de télécommunications. Et dans nos entrevues avec elles, parce qu'on les a rencontrées, elles nous ont dit que la collaboration avec Montréal est très bonne puis qu'il n'y a pas d'enjeu de leur côté pour implémenter ce genre d'initiative-là. Donc, je pense qu'il y a un intérêt du côté des compagnies. Je peux évidemment pas parler en leur nom, mais il y a un environnement là, qui est différent de la 4G, le 3G, qui donne plus d'intérêt aux compagnies de télécommunications de travailler avec la ville.
Merci. Dernière petite question. Ça fait du pouce sur la première question qui a été posée, davantage au niveau de la communication. quel est le rôle de la ville dans toute cette communication-là qui, à la fin, vendent la technologie, le produit aussi? Est-ce que c'est à la ville de porter le gros du burden de promouvoir cette technologie-là, alors qu'à la fin, c'est la technologie des Bell, des Vidéotron, des Rogers? Dans quelle mesure on prend une grosse partie de cette communication-là? Oui, pour nos citoyens, mais à la fin, c'est pour que le service et d'un point de vue un peu plus corpo et business, c'est eux qui vont aller chercher ce bénéfice-là. Donc, dans quelle part, eux ne s'impliquent pas à vendre et à mitiger ces risques sociaux-là, conjointement avec la ville ou même plus que la ville, puis nous, on va être là en support, ou nous, il faut prendre le leadership dans cet aspect-là?
Merci pour la question. Et un point de clarification, certainement pas, c'est pas le rôle de la municipalité de faire la promotion des services privés, mais dans l'aspect des services qui sont fournis par la municipalité en conjonction avec le 5G, c'est Bell, TELUS, Rogers n'ont pas besoin d'aide pour faire leur publicité, c'est clair, mais c'est plus comme les services qui ont la réflexion sur la municipalité, la ville de Montréal. On veut s'assurer que c'est eux qui est la source d'information proactive. Pas, il y a plusieurs sources qu'on peut prendre des différents sites d'Internet, mais on veut ça que, en le rôle de la ville, c'est vraiment une source d'information qu'on peut avoir du confiance en dedans. Donc, c'est vraiment ça qu'on veut préciser, mais c'est une bonne clarification parce que non, on veut vraiment pas ça, que les partenariats entre les telcos puis la municipalité, ça se vient comme on fait la promotion pour eux.
Puis comme...
John Stewart?
Désolé. Oui, rapidement. Donc, comme on a mentionné aussi, Ben a fait déjà un très bon point là-dessus. On ne veut pas vendre la technologie pour les telcos, mais comme on a mentionné, à la fin de la journée, s'il y a des plaintes, s'il y a des inquiétudes par rapport aux conséquences sur l'exposition à long terme sur la santé ou sur la gestion des données, les citoyens vont aller se plaindre aux élus de la ville ou à l'administration municipale. Et l'administration a une responsabilité, vu qu'elle signe des ententes de déploiement d'infrastructures, d'avoir des réponses à ces questions-là. Fait que c'est vraiment pas de vendre la 5G, c'est pas de vendre des services 5G, ça appartient vraiment aux acteurs privés, mais c'est vraiment de montrer que la ville a fait ses devoirs pour s'assurer qu'il n'y a rien qui est dangereux pour les citoyens dans cette...
Est-ce que mitiger le risque social est à la ville ou au telco? Si on prend d'autres exemples de technologie, le risque social va être à celui qui essaie de développer une certaine technologie. C'est des technologies souvent plus ciblées, donc c'est plus facile à mitiger le risque, mais quand on prend un grand déploiement comme la 5G, de mitiger ce risque social-là, puis j'embarque pas dans un service particulier qui utiliserait la 5G, mais la confiance de ça, quel est le rôle des telcos à devoir aussi, eux autres, montrer que c'est sans impact, safe et que c'est à forte valeur pour le citoyen?
Dans nos recommandations, en termes de partenariat, on mentionne vraiment qu'on veut que ça se fasse en partenariat avec les compagnies de télécommunications parce qu'on pense qu'elles ont une responsabilité pour communiquer ce message-là, montrer que leur technologie n'est pas dangereuse. On a mentionné aussi d'autres agences comme les agences de santé publique qui pourraient aider à participer à ces efforts de communication-là. Fait que c'est vraiment pas quelque chose qui repose entièrement sur la Ville de Montréal, mais on pense que la Ville de Montréal doit avoir des réponses vu qu'elle fait partie des acteurs qui déploient ces infrastructures-là en étant signataires des ententes d'accès aux infrastructures. Donc, c'est vraiment juste d'avoir des réponses, montrer que la Ville a fait ses devoirs, puis répondre aux inquiétudes des citoyens s'il y en a qui sont soulevées en conseil municipal, conseil d'arrondissement, etc.
Okay, John Stewart.
Thank you, team. What a wonderful presentation. Thank you. As a former policy and research director in Ottawa, I've seen a lot of money spent on work that wasn't this good. And I hope that in years to come, you're all going to get paid like them, but do work like this. My question would be, let's imagine that I continue to have the privilege of coming to Montreal for a few years to come. And 5 years from now, when 5G is fully implemented in this city, I'm still tottering around here. And, oh dear, I've lost my question. Here we go. So, do you have specific visions of what sorts of things I might be able to do 5 years from now that might work differently? You know, what sorts of experiences would people have in the city of Montreal 5 years from now, thanks to 5G? Just a specific vignette. And how do you hope your recommendations would make those experiences a little better, or possible, or happen sooner?
Thank you, John, for the question. We don't really advocate for any use case during our report. We took a technology-neutral approach in our report. We just admitted that 5G is an imminent thing that is coming, and it's a responsibility for the city because it will have the social cost that Fred talked to us about. But just to answer your question, these technologies take a while to develop. We can take the case of the city of Barcelona, which has developed multiple pilots and has only been able to scale two of the 26 pilots that it has conducted, right? So probably it'll take a while for you to see flying cars around. But in reality, you can see some advantages on telehealth, tourism, education, for instance, remote education, banking. Like there are significant advantages that you can see in the short term.
You could have an app that maps all of the potholes in Montreal, and then would that work, Ben? Could we? Okay, our final 10 minutes are for the room, and we'll begin with
begin with me, and then
with you,
Dan has had his hand up for 5 minutes now.
No, Dan is working the system here. So, but we're going to start with you with a question from online, and then we'll go to Dan, and then Sandrine, and then Leslie, and then Isabel. I got to write those down. Wow. Okay.
So the question online comes from Zoomin, and she says, "Thank you for your wonderful presentation. Thank you for mentioning the social inclusive aspect. How to include vulnerable groups such as the low-income people in 5G practices? What are the challenges for the city to ensure an inclusive transition to 5G?"
Yeah, maybe I can start, and then some of my teammates can add on to it. I think a big thing that we are trying to touch upon is one of the recommendations that I explained, the lending programs. Lending programs can really give access to the internet and obviously 5G to people who really don't have it. I'm going to expand just a little bit more on the Las Vegas example that I talked about. It really helped. It was 435 phones given to at-risk adults and teens. It's people who mainly didn't have a phone and didn't have access to the internet. Users were surveyed after the program because it happened a few years ago. It's still ongoing, but it did happen. If I have my data correct and if I remember my numbers, they were surveyed. 82% of them said that this was the only way they could access the internet. So like it was their only way of personally accessing the internet. Maybe they could do it through a public library. Maybe they could do it like in a cafe. But this was their only personal way of accessing the internet. 82% of them. That's big. 80% of them said they used it mainly for accessing city and social services. We're bridging a gap there. We're saying that 80% of those people cannot access city services because they don't have a phone. Then that's a problem. And around 78% of them said that they mainly used it for searching for job opportunities. And so once again, we're bridging a gap there by deploying lending programs that are not only restricted to on-site, I go to a library, I grab a laptop and I start working, but I grab the phone and I take it away. That really, really brings marginalized communities that don't have access to the internet into the 5G conversation. One last thing about this program, it allowed, after the 18 months, it allowed for them to take the phone with them and continue the service and keep the number at their own expense. That is also huge, because if not, they're just returning the phone and we're back at the same place, right? Yes, they access city services, they access social services for 18 months, but if they have to return the phone, then we still have a problem. The fact that they could take it and they could use it for the next, like however many amount of years they had at their own expense, also big. So yeah, we're bringing marginalized communities that don't have access to these resources by doing things like lending programs. And the city, we're recommending the city do something like that. I don't know if anybody wants to add to that. No.
One of the reasons why we chose device lending programs is because of the amount of evidence that is out there about their effectiveness. I have another example, which is the Toronto Public Library Network, which has a device lending program that has been operated since 2015. The program started with a network of 6 libraries and has been expanded to almost 29. But just to give you some numbers regarding how it has reached disadvantaged population, 79% of the users reported that they didn't have access to internet at home. And of course, these are low-income households, etc. And as Dominic said, there's also evidence that these device programs also allow economic and social integration. So 36% of the people that access the program in Toronto use these platforms to find employment, for instance.
Thank you. Dan Weinstock and Sandrine is on deck.
Great presentation, really important. So it could be that you answered my question just now, but the way in which you described lending under this sounds to me a lot like giving, right? So are we just, for the reasons that you just mentioned, having to, if you borrow a tablet for 2 weeks, then you're back to square one when you have to give it back. To what degree are we really talking about giving people basic tools with which then become theirs, right? Mm-hmm. And to what degree does taking that extra step, which sounds like you're already kind of, taking by describing lending as something that can be essentially long-term over years, to what degree does that introduce new sort of policy challenges, financial, et cetera, that you maybe sort of skirt a little bit by leaning on the vocabulary of lending rather than giving?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm going to take that again. I love lending programs. So yeah, obviously, if there's a difference between, I get what you're saying, right? At some point, it becomes just giving. I think the lending part comes in, there's a period, and then you have to give say in this case, the phone back. There's an option for you to take it at your own expense. But if you don't have the means or you don't have the capacity, you give it back and it was lent to you. Yes, for a long period of time, but it was lent to you. I'm all for giving phones to everyone, but I understand that comes at a high cost as well. If I have my numbers correct again, the Las Vegas one, it was 435 phones. Not all of them were kept after. Some of them were returned. Not everybody has the capacity after 18 months to hold a phone and pay for a data plan. But it cost the city of Las Vegas around $200,000 to $250,000. The one that Germán just talked about from the city of Toronto, it was over 2 years. I believe it's still ongoing, but because it was longer, it was a little bit more costly. If I'm not mistaken, it cost the city of Toronto a little bit under $1 million Canadian dollars. And so, yes, it comes at an expense. We're not suggesting the city just throw phones at people, because that's not how it works. It is very, very studied who you're giving the phones to, or the smartphone, or the tablets, or the laptops. It could even be hotspot for people to take home and just have the connectivity at home for an extended period of time. It really does allow people to access services that they wouldn't have access to otherwise. And to be honest, find a job. We've all walked the city, the city, right? We're hiring signs everywhere, but not all of them are there. A lot of jobs are online. And so if we're not allowing people to be online, if we're not letting people be online, then we're also not allowing people to find jobs. And yeah. Yeah.
It's not that for me, the fact that we're talking about lending, it sounds like giving is a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think probably it's a good thing, given the fact that connectivity now is like having access to water or heat.
Yeah.
Right? It's just not an option for
Mm-hmm.
living in a modern.
Yeah.
Which I know we also don't give to people for free, water or heat. But that's okay. But that could open up that debate. We are short of time and long on questions. So Sandrine is up, then Leslie, then Anmol, and that is probably going to bring us to a close. But we need quick questions, quick answers.
Okay. Fantastic presentation. Thank you so much for this. I really liked your recommendations mapping the digital divide. And I wonder how it connects to the recommendations about the public consultation and about the comm strategy. Have you brainstormed any of the actual ways that you're going to reach individuals that are currently falling in the cracks to make sure that when you do a public consultation, they're actually consulted?
Yep.
Yeah, it's a great point. One of the concerns that we developed in the policy brief is, like, of course, we want to collect data, we want to conduct a survey, but if you want to conduct a survey on internet usage, you have to be sure that you connect to the people who don't have internet right now. So in our considerations for implementation, we considered options to have maybe people knocking on doors, or just having like a physical presence in the neighborhoods where there's a digital gap, because we want to make sure that we don't fall short on collecting efficient data and making sure that there's not a bias in favor of people who already have access right now.
Hi. My question is actually quite related to Sandrine's. In recommendation number 1 with the 5G Observatory, if I'm not mistaken, you said something about public engagement as part of that. I might be mistaken. So 1, am I mistaken? Is there public engagement as part of that? And 2, if there is, how do you decide who's involved in that process? Do you want to take it?
Yeah, sure. To be honest, we didn't delve into the functioning of the observatory. That's not the scope of our research right now. So far, was justifying its feasibility and the process that it will take to just get there. So the part of the presentation is not on a report. But ideally, one thing that we find very useful is engaging community organizations also. The city of Nantes and the city of Barcelona have also done that. It's not a permanent dialogue between telecommunication companies and the municipal government, but also involving these stakeholders that are on the ground. One example that we have from the city of Nantes is that in the observatory that they have digital representatives from each borough of the city. And this is a way in which they can guarantee that these voices are being heard.
And if I may just rapidly, earlier this year, we had a great course on policy evaluation, and one of the things that was mentioned is the importance of understanding the stakeholder environment and having people on the ground that can really understand which are the legitimate stakeholders. So this is something that we consider.
Yeah.
Fred, that was shameless. Okay. Anmol, quick question with a quick answer, and you're going to take us into lunch.
Okay. Congratulations, team. That was a really sharp presentation. One thing, if I'm not mistaken, is that there's quite a bit of lack of competition in the telecommunications sector here in Canada. I'm curious whether that adds a layer of complexity to the rollout of 5G in a city like Montreal, and if you could just expand a little bit on that. I'm sorry, Ben.
You want to go?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so again, the issue of a spectrum regulation, again, is kind of out of our scope. But just to give you a kind of an answer of it, I was very glad to hear that the news that the rules for the next auction of 5G were announced in May, and one of the components that they used was allow rural organizations and community organizations in sparse areas to access and also apply for a part of the spectrum and to be able to develop their own 5G infrastructure. That is kind of not in our report, but thank you very much.
Very much, team. Great job.
Sorry.